Happy Saturday, Risers. Saagar and I are back to take another look at some of our favorite segments from this week. Of course, we had a ton of fun covering this week's Democratic debate. Fun. And over a million of you tuned in to watch our coverage. That part is super cool. Thank you.
And speaking of that debate, this week proved a huge week for Bernie Sanders. He had to fend off a vicious smear levied by the Elizabeth Warren campaign at the start of the week, but he turned it into one of his biggest fundraising weeks ever, bringing in more than $1.7 million from over 100,000 donations on the debate day alone. We had a number of guests on this week to discuss Bernie. So to start with, let's take a look at a part of our conversation with Young Turk's Cenk Uygur, who explained how establishment staffers have hurt more progressive candidates and how that has helped Bernie Sanders rise above the rest of the fold. Let's take a listen to that.
Elizabeth Warren's staff, half of them are wonderful progressives. I know it to be a fact. I've seen them fight the banks. I've seen them fight corporate power with my own eyes. And I've seen some things behind the scenes that you guys haven't seen. That's why I've always called her a progressive. That's why I've defended her so much, okay? But half of her staff are, mainstream media people. Not media, but mainstream Democrat people. And they're a cancer. They destroyed Beto O'Rourke's campaign. He did great as a grassroots candidate that was uncorrupted at the Senate level. He gets to the presidential level, hires a bunch of Obama people. They run the same old tired script. It's a disaster. Now they've poisoned Warren's team.
Very interesting take. I mean, look, ultimately, the buck stops with Warren. She hired these people, and she greenlit this attack. But I do think it's really an interesting note and something that you sort of sound alarms on at times, that it really does matter who's in the room.
Personnel is policy.
Personnel is policy. So Obama, when he comes to office with this great grassroots movement, plus all this Wall Street cash, who does he turn to when he's in office?
Gene Sperling, all these other Clinton people who worked in,
a bunch of
Larry
Wall Street
Summers
ties,
and all these other guys.
All those guys who had deep Wall Street ties.
This is exactly what Elizabeth Warren, I mean, her campaign manager worked for Hillary Clinton, right? I mean, this is straight out of the Clinton playbook, and you surround yourself with the wrong people, you're going to make the wrong decisions, they're not going to tell you the right things, they're not going to give you the right advice, they're going to say the wrong thing to the media, they believe in the part of your vision which doesn't actually resonate with the voters. This is what happens, guys. That's what it is.
Yeah, it says a lot. I mean, that is something you should take a look at when you're deciding who to support and can't to support, who they choose to put on their staff. It says a lot about how actually committed they are to the values that they are espousing.
That's exactly right.
Friend of the show and Sanders National Campaign co-chair Nina Turner also dropped by the show this week. She laid out how Bernie's progressive principles help position him for success in a general election.
What Senator Sanders is fighting for is what the majority of the working poor and barely middle class in this country want and need. And that is how you win in a general election. This is not just about the primary. It's how do you win in the general election? You have to have a movement. You have to have energy. You have to have synergy. You have to have commitment. And you have to show the people of this nation that you are going to rock with them against the entrenched Wall Street interests of this nation. And Senator Sanders is that candidate.
Yeah, I mean, Sanders is the only one who seems to have figured out the way that you win is that if you bring new people into the process. That is ultimately what Trump did. But I mean, look, I've been saying this all week. I don't think he's prosecuting the case effectively enough against Joe Biden, and that the path dependency of the Democratic primary election right now seems to benefit him with all of these structural forces on his side. And it just seems like he needs to fight a little bit harder if he actually wants to do it.
Listen, if there's one person on that team who's not afraid to throw a punch, is Nina Turner.
Right,
she's by far, she's so fierce and does such a good job defending him and prosecuting the case, and probably going a little bit further even than the campaign really wants her to go. But they need to embrace a little bit more of the Nina Turner in terms of the strategy and less of the sort of cautious, my friend Joe, et cetera.
Very mystifying. All right, finally, we wanted to return to our conversation with the Daily Beast Hanna Trudo. She talked about her recent story detailing how President Trump sees Bernie Sanders as a possible threat. Let's take a listen.
When we were working on this story, it kind of, the puzzle pieces came together that Bernie has a lot of the things, like you mentioned, that Trump is sort of afraid of or can see as a legitimate threat. I mean, his crowd sizes are something that obviously Trump loves. And just anybody who's surging at any given moment in the polls, specifically an outsider like him. I mean, it would be, like you said, kind of mentioned, it's different if it were Biden because he doesn't see Biden in the same way, but he sees this like outside candidate who's threatening to like break up the status quo in the same way that he did. Obviously different approaches, but he sees that and he's worried about that.
He should be. I've said it here before. I mean, I think Joe Biden is the easiest playbook that the Trump campaign could ever run. The entire RNC machinery is ready to destroy Joe Biden. I think Bernie fundamentally changes the game. I still think Trump would beat him, but it would be a very different race, and it would be one which was like a true battlefield of ideas. I think ultimately it actually would come down to culture. I think it would be a total cultural referendum for the election, but it would just be so different from the way that it would be with Joe Biden.
Well, and that's the thing is the RNC certainly knows how to run the playbook against a candidate like Joe Biden.
Yeah, easy.
And so
they can rev the whole thing up. There's a $2 billion machine.
They know exactly how to do it. But we've already seen some of their sort of preview of their ham-handed attacks on Bernie Sanders, calling him like a gas-guzzling millionaire and whatever. I mean, it's just that's not how you go against him, because this is partly to draw a parallel here. Partly what Elizabeth Warren is finding out is you can't go off of your perception or what you're getting the media's perception of Bernie Sanders is. You actually have to understand how voters feel about him. And there's such a gulf between the way the media portrays him and the way that people actually feel about him. So if you are in the establishment bubble on the right or the left and you're trying to launch attacks based on a media perception, they're going to fall flat.
See, that's the thing about the whole, like, oh, but Bernie's a millionaire. It's like, they're trying to tap into an idea that he's a hypocrite, but there's not that underlying feeling in the electorate.
Not
with
at all.
Hillary, when it was about her emails, it wasn't about her emails. It was, this woman is dishonest, and she gets away with something that anybody else wouldn't be able to get away with, and has enriched herself and her husband to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars in the process. That was kind of true.
People felt that about her. It rang true.
Right, that was true. Everyone was like, when you talk about the emails encapsulated corruption, the nepotism, the Clinton enrichment scheme of the last 25 years. That's what it was all about.
And the rules don't
Bernie
apply
doesn't
to me.
have all that. Yeah, exactly. The rules don't apply to me. Bernie doesn't have any of that. So it actually has to be much more about his ideas, about the cultural moment, and about the left movement that defines him than like, oh, he's like has 3 houses, which I mean, whatever, like I don't really care.
Right,
But,
Venezuela or whatever.
Venezuela,
yeah.
that stuff doesn't land. What would land is much more like, here's what Bernie would do to the country. And I think that is probably what they should do.
Here's what would happen if they're launching those attacks about Venezuela and he's a gas-guzzling millionaire on the one hand, et cetera,
Right.
and Bernie's out there saying, here's what I'm going to do for you on healthcare. Here's how I'm going to make your life better. Here's how I'm going to cancel your student debt, cancel your medical debt, actually improve your life. And they're on these sort of superfluous issues. It's not going to work out for him.
It's not. But
that does it for us. We'll be back later today for our recurring segment with Katie Halber from Rolling Stone's Useful Idiots podcast, where we break down the week that was in media mishaps. I wonder what we're going to talk to Katie about this
That's
week.
right.
There's just so little. They were so good this week.
tomorrow we're going to have another round of Rising Qs. We're going to see you all then.